The gravel was cold under my heels, still in my wedding dress, suitcase already packed and waiting on the porch, placed there before I'd even finished my first dance. Behind me, the band's music faded into the night. Through the locked door, my mother-in-law's voice. This was never going to be your home. What none of them knew was why my father wasn't answering his phone that night. He was already 3 blocks away, watching. My name is Priya. I'm 29, a structural engineer in Charlotte, and until that night, I thought I understood the weight loads of every kind of pressure, except the kind that comes from a family pretending to love you. My mother died when I was 11, and my father, Daniel, a police captain who'd just turned in his badge after 30 years, raised me on discipline, quiet routines, and a life insurance trust he never once let us touch out of pride. We didn't have much. We had enough. The Whitfields had everything and made sure you knew it. Old money, older manners, and a devotion to appearances that outpaced any devotion to each other. Their daughter, my husband's sister, ran a boutique that hadn't turned a profit in 2 years, quietly kept alive by wire transfers no one discussed at dinner. I noticed things like that. I noticed the prenup they insisted on rewriting 3 days before the wedding, clauses shifting so quietly I almost didn't catch the language change. I noticed my mother-in-law once murmuring to her sister about assets Priya doesn't even know she has yet, and smiling like she'd said nothing at all. In public, I was toasted as the daughter we always wanted. In the family group chat, forwarded to me by accident one sleepless night, I was called the placeholder, someone useful until she wasn't. I told myself I was imagining the difference. I wasn't. By the time the ceremony began at 4 p.m., the paperwork had already changed hands twice. I'd slipped away from the reception to change out of the dress before the after-party, expecting nothing more complicated than tired feet and a zipper I couldn't reach alone. Instead, I found my suitcase on the porch, my garment bag draped over the railing like something set out for pickup, and a deadbolt that no longer recognized the key I'd been given only that morning. I knocked. Not frantically, just once, the way you knock when you still believe there's been a mistake. My husband wasn't inside. He was already asleep in the main house, I'd learn later, moved there, per his mother's arrangement, before the cake had even been cut. It was her voice that answered instead, calm and almost kind, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. Marriages like this don't need a wife in the house, she said through the door. They need a name on a form. I want to tell you I screamed or pounded on that door or demanded my husband come speak to me himself. I didn't. Something in me went very still and very quiet, the way it does right before you understand a thing completely. I picked up my suitcase, set it back down on the top step, and sat beside it, the cold gravel pressing through the thin silk at my knees. I didn't cry. I dialed a number I hadn't needed to use in 6 years, not since the week after my mother's funeral, when I'd needed someone to simply come and not ask why. Some instincts never retire, not in a father who spent 3 decades learning exactly what it looks like when someone is about to lose everything, and exactly what to do about it before they do. Here is what none of them knew while I sat on that porch. I hadn't spent the weeks before my wedding simply choosing flowers and fittings. I'd spent them paying attention. When the prenup changed 3 days before the ceremony, I'd already saved a copy of the original, the one my fiancé and I had actually agreed to, before his mother sat in on what was supposed to be our final signing. I didn't confront anyone about the discrepancy. I just kept the file, dated and time-stamped, in a folder my father had taught me to keep years earlier. Everything in writing, everything backed up, and never explain why until you have to. I'd also seen the emails. My fiancé's laptop, left open one evening while he showered, showed a thread with his mother about transferring the Elm Street property into the marriage. Language so clinical it read like a merger, not a home. I forwarded them to myself before I closed the screen. And there was the voicemail, accidentally left on my phone, after a butt dial from my mother-in-law to the family attorney, her voice brisk and businesslike. Just get the signature dated before the ceremony. We'll clean up the paperwork after. I hadn't understood the full shape of it yet, but I understood enough to protect myself quietly, the way my father had trained me to protect myself my whole life, not with confrontation, but with documentation. What I didn't know was that my father had been doing his own version of the same thing. Using contacts from 30 years on the force, contacts that don't simply expire when you turn in a badge, he'd pulled the property records on Elm Street the week the engagement was announced. The Whitfields were 3 months behind on a loan secured against that very house, the same house they intended to fold quietly into my name, under the cover of marriage, so that if the bank came calling, it would come for me instead of them. He hadn't told me. He'd simply come to the wedding with a folder of his own, And when I didn't answer his texts fast enough that evening, he didn't wait for an explanation. He parked 3 blocks away and watched. By midnight, 2 investigations were already underway. Theirs to keep me quiet and ours to make sure I never had to be. My father didn't come with sirens. He came with 2 uniformed officers he'd called as a courtesy. Men who owed him nothing but respect from 30 years of shifts together, there only to document, not to arrest. This was a civil matter, and he knew the difference better than anyone in that house. But the sight of 2 patrol cars idling in a circular driveway lined with valet-parked luxury sedans did something no confrontation could have. It broke the performance instantly. My mother-in-law opened the door, already rehearsing an explanation for the neighbors. She hadn't rehearsed one for us. Inside, in front of a wedding party that hadn't yet gone home, my father laid 2 folders on the hallway table like he was closing out a case file, because in every way that mattered, he was. The loan default notice on Elm Street. The original prenup beside the rewritten one, dated 3 days apart in ink that told its own story. He didn't raise his voice. He read statute numbers the way he used to read Miranda rights, evenly, completely, without needing to repeat himself. They had expected a devastated bride on a porch, begging to be let back inside her own wedding night. Instead, they got a retired police captain and a structural engineer who understood load-bearing weaknesses far better than they understood the fault lines in their own foundation. I was the one who played the voicemail. I hadn't planned to be the one to do it, but when my mother-in-law started to say I was misunderstanding a family matter, I simply held up my phone and let her own voice fill the silence. Just get her signature before she has a lawyer of her own. Nobody in that hallway spoke for a long moment. Not even her. My husband, I still don't know what to call him now, was asked directly if he'd known about the plan to transfer the property into my name before the loan collapsed onto whoever was listed on the deed. He didn't deny it. He didn't defend it either. He just looked at the floor and said quietly, "I thought it would work out." His aunt, who had spent the entire reception assuring me how lucky I was to be marrying into this family, took one step back from the hallway table and didn't say another word. She'd defended them all night. She had nothing left to defend once the paperwork was on the table instead of the toasts. The annulment went through within a month, filed on grounds of fraud, the kind of paperwork that moves quickly when the evidence is already organized in date order. The Whitfields lost Elm Street to the bank anyway. My name had never actually made it onto that deed. I'd made sure of that, quietly, before I ever said I do. The boutique's funding disappeared the same week, the way money always does when it was never really about the business to begin with. I didn't call anyone to gloat. I didn't need to. I blocked every Whitfield number I had, forwarded any further contact, emails, letters, one attempted visit, straight to my attorney, and stopped answering for a family that had never really been asking, only instructing. The next morning, I changed my own locks. Not because I was afraid of anyone showing up, because some rituals aren't about fear at all. They're about deciding, with your own hands, who gets to walk through your door from now on. I folded the wedding dress into a donation bag without ceremony, the way you'd clear out a drawer of things that no longer belonged to the life you were living. No tears over the silk, no final look in the mirror, just fabric, folded, given away. The Whitfields spent the following year exactly where their choices had been quietly steering them all along into a financial reckoning they'd tried, almost successfully, to hand off to me instead. Here's what I understand now that I didn't understand standing on that porch. A family that has already planned your humiliation has usually already planned your usefulness first. The two aren't separate. They're the same plan, just at different stages. And any generosity you offer people like that, your name, your trust, your silence, is never received as love. It's received as leverage, filed away for whenever they need it. I think about that night sometimes and wonder, would you have gone back inside if they'd apologized? If someone had opened that door an hour later with soft eyes and softer words? And more than that, should an apology ever come with a signature still attached to it? Some quiet expectation that forgiveness means access? I didn't get revenge that night. Revenge was simply the loan they could never outrun, the reckoning already written into their own choices long before my father parked 3 blocks away. Peace was something else entirely. Peace was a woman standing in her own doorway at 8 the next morning, screwdriver in hand, changing her own locks with no one's help but her own. I didn't need to slam a door that night. I just needed to make sure I was the one holding the key.